I'm Asheesh Agarwal. I'm a consultant for the American Edge Project, which is a nonprofit coalition designed to let people know about the importance of technology to America's economic prosperity, national security, and really values. I've been active in government and politics for a long time. I was privileged to serve in the first Trump administration. I was part of his reelect effort in 2020. My first job in Washington was at the Federal Trade Commission working for Ted Cruz, who was then a mid-level staffer at the FTC, and to educate people and policymakers and talk to them about the importance of technology to America's future. So that's economic prosperity, national security, and really our values. I mean, you want to talk about AI, there are projections that AI could add something like $15 trillion to the global economy in the next 5 years. That's great. That's tremendous opportunity. But as you say, it also is creating some trepidation for a lot of people. So we have to manage that smartly.
So $15 trillion added to the economy. What we keep hearing about in terms of artificial intelligence is actually taking jobs away, clerical jobs, back-end jobs, call centers, things of that sort. Is that 15 trillion including the jobs that may be taken away, or are those simply being repositioned economically?
Well, what it should do, and I think what it will do over time, is make people more productive. So you talk about a call center, for example. And by the way, my wife used to work in a call center. It's going to allow AI, I think, to manage a lot of the routine work more efficiently, so that customers can get their questions answered quicker, but allow humans to answer the more involved questions, to add that personal touch to people. So just like any new technology, I think there are going to be some changes. I think some of the more routine functions that people do, and that's whether you're a lawyer like me or an accountant or anything else, I do think that the technology is going to be able to do those. But that should be a good thing by letting us, humans, focus on more important and more complex tasks.
Okay. So in terms of, I mean, it's such a broad concept, but it is the singular thing that we need to be focusing on. We're in Ohio. We have data centers popping up like mushrooms, $1 billion at a time. They're consuming our water. They're consuming our electricity. There's no way around this, however. I know China is leaps and bounds ahead of us. In terms of where America is versus China, do you have a read on that you can enlighten us with?
Yeah, so we're probably ahead, but just barely. There was a federal commission recently that came out and said that China is poised to pass us in the next 5 years. There was an Australian study that found that China is ahead of the U.S. on 57 out of 64 kind of key technologies. And look, I'm of a generation, and Steve, you probably are too. Sorry, Shawn, you probably are too, where we're just kind of used to having treating technology as an American birthright. Like we're always number one. We always have been, always will be. Well, it's not necessarily the case anymore. China's very sophisticated. They're spending something like $3 trillion on AI and other advanced technologies. They're stealing something like $500 billion in American intellectual property every year. You talk about energy. Just one more stat.
Yeah.
Most of our energy infrastructure, like our transmission lines, about a quarter century old. China just spent something like $442 billion to build 30,000 miles worth of these kind of advanced transmission lines. It's only going to help them in their AI infrastructure race. So yeah, the game is on.
With that, in terms of that, I want to shift a little bit over to talking about the economy and our infrastructure. I had a meeting last night with a former county engineer talking about infrastructure and how much need we have. The United States, granted, China funds their own money through their own production of debt. We still use debts economically with underlying value sets to it. Can America catch up? Because when I go around Ohio and I look at Steubenville and I look at Weirton, West Virginia, I look at Fremont, Ohio, and I see I see factories that were really nice in 1920, but now we're 100 years later, and we see these old brick factories. China has brand new state of the art everything. Is America positioned to even compete at the level because our infrastructure needs that much updating?
We really are. And it's going to require, the government working, hand in hand with the private sector. So I'll just say that I share every sentiment that you're talking about. I grew up in Kokomo, Indiana,
Oh,
which
yeah.
was very much just a steel mill town. My dad was a metallurgist. I live in central Indiana now. And the economy is transitioning here, just like it is in Ohio. A partner of NVIDIA just announced this huge multi-billion-dollar investment around West Lafayette, which is where Purdue is. So the economy is shifting, and we're all going to shift with it. But we have, I think, several advantages over China. Number one, just our private sector. So much of what's happening in China is state directed. There's really no such thing as an independent company in China, independent of the Chinese Communist Party. Here we have, let a thousand flowers bloom. We have so many great companies, big and small, investing, making their own individual decisions. They have the freedom to, capitalize on that and develop the technology as they see fit. And over time, I think those advantages are going to be really helpful. But it's going to take all of us working together, and we can't, we can't kneecap, our own companies here at home.
Yeah. So in that same vein, then let's talk about reshoring a little bit of our economy. Clearly with COVID, we recognize that we had allowed for critical infrastructure, critical production companies, things such as pharmaceuticals, PPE for first responders and people that work in hospital emergency rooms and surgery centers to be completely manufactured offshore. How do we address that? Is America equipped to do that? Do we have the resolve? Do we have the will? Are we going to bring these companies back and then basically reemploy our people that are going to be lost in that shift of AI coming in, so that we have good jobs for Americans?
Yeah, well, and here's where I give President Trump lots of credit. In full disclosure, I served in the first Trump administration. I was part of the reelect effort in 2020. So I do think he has his put his finger on the button in terms of America's economic interests. And it's going to take us working hand in hand, with our partners and allies abroad to lower barriers to trade, so that American workers can continue to excel here without unfair foreign barriers to commerce. So one of the things that I really love that he has done, the vice president has done, is tell our friends in Europe and really around the world, stop discriminating against American companies. Shawn, I don't know if you've
Right.
how closely followed it, but the Europeans have imposed hundreds of billions of dollars in fines against American companies. They've designed these laws to target them, and they've admitted as much, and they're imposing these fines, and then they tell their own constituents, hey, this money is going to help lower your own tax bill. Well, that's basically just a wealth transfer, a tariff from American workers and shareholders to European bureaucrats. And I give the president and his administration a lot of credit for standing up to that.
Oh, I'll tell you what, I mean, my 2 cents on that is I think you start this conversation at Bretton Woods, and then you go up to the Nixon administration with the taking America off the gold standard with the dirty float. People don't understand the dirty float that was happening. And ever since then, basically, we've been in an economic exchange with our friends, with our allies. And thank God that America has provided the naval resources across all of the seas to make sure that commerce has been distributed freely. And, that's why we live in a free world today. And Trump is the first person to really recognize this. I think Biden took a massive step backwards.
Well, you're absolutely right about that. And you want to talk about the free flow of commerce. I would say today that is in semiconductors and telecommunications equipment. And one of the things I give President Trump credit for, and I'll give former President Biden a little little bit of credit for this too. They did do a few good things.
Yeah.
It was trying to stop the spread of Chinese technology abroad, trying to get the Europeans and our friends in Asia to use American technology, or at least not Chinese telecommunications equipment, in which the Chinese could embed spyware and whatnot. And you're seeing that today with things like AI. So China wants to embed its AI infrastructure into the global South, what used to be called the Third World. We have American companies out there, like Meta, trying to get those countries to adopt American open source platforms and build on American technology. And that really is in all of our interests.
Yeah. Asheesh, in terms of where we're headed, one of the great questions is our preparedness of our people coming into the workforce. Educationally, Asheesh, where do you think America is in terms of being able to supply the need of the brain power that is required for us to continue moving forward?
I think I think we're a little bit behind the curve, quite frankly, about where we should be. But I do think there is really bipartisan recognition that we need to step up our game. And it starts honestly in elementary school and in high school. I have two kids in middle school. They're both on their robotics teams. They're both taking computer programming, because that really is, I tell them that's where the future is, along with space. It's another great example where I think the federal government and the states can work hand in hand with the private sector. And again, something else I'll give a little bit of credit to the Biden administration for is starting up these partnerships to try to educate the workforce. So former President Biden had an event at the White House where he had executives from IBM, Google, what have you, and they all committed to investing hundreds of billions of dollars in cybersecurity training for the next generation of students. So we are behind where we should be as compared to China, but I think we certainly have the capacity to catch up.
You mentioned space. I see that we're possibly a number of things. I'm one of the kids that grew up in. I was really young in the 1960s, but the 1970s, every kid that was on my street wanted to be an astronaut when we grew up. That was our goal.
And Neil Armstrong, Ohio, right?
We have Neil Armstrong. We have, of course, the Wright brothers were the first people to fly, Dayton, Ohio. I'll throw a few plugs out there. I mean, Michael Foreman was a space shuttle commander out of Cleveland, Ohio. Judith Resnick on the Space Shuttle Challenger, but was lost, an Ohioan. So Ohio has a deep space history. But we're seeing the entire sector moving over to privatization. Blue Origin spending as much money as they can to get up there. SpaceX leading the way, so far advanced. United Launch Alliance, ULA. I mean, these companies are moving forward. You said space is the next frontier. Can you elaborate on that a little bit as you see what's happening in terms of us moving up into the sky and what that means for everything technology?
Well, the market really is unlimited when you talk about the potential for and I know I'm preaching to the choir on this, Shawn. Things like eventually down the road, maybe not as far down the road as we think. Mining resources from asteroids. Doing some manufacturing on Mars. On the moon. These are the sorts of things that were science fiction in the 1970s, and I grew up reading a lot of the same sorts of things that you do, but it's becoming much closer to reality. And it's another example where light touch regulation really can allow the private sector to flourish. You talk about Challenger, what a tragedy, but back in the 1980s, really post Apollo, it was very heavy-handed government dependent growth in space. By backing off some of that, by giving contracts to private companies, you've really seen just tremendous growth. Rocket Labs, another company that's doing a lot of great work in the in the launch field. And that's what we need, in AI and in semiconductors and quantum computing as well.
So one step on that in terms of defense, Space Force, what's your impression? Do you have an impression on where we're at with Space Force and how that's integrating into our military system in a positive way moving forward?
Here again, just thank goodness that President Trump had the vision to get that done in his first term. Right? There was a lot of resistance and snickering about it, but he really did see what the future of defense and as a deterrence looks like with the Space Force. From what I've heard, it's been there's some fits and starts, right? It's we've got 5 other great branches out there, right? Including the Coast Guard. They've got their own capabilities, and integrating a new branch into that has its in such a large institution as the Pentagon can have its fits and starts.
Right.
But we're all on the same team, obviously, and I'm sure they'll figure it out.
Let me ask you this question. It's the open ended, but boy, it's always the fun one. What keeps you up at night right now? What do you worry about?
Yeah, I really do worry about a future in which America is left behind a little bit, and what that might mean for my children. Like all of us think, we all want our children to have a little better life, a leisure life than we have. And you think about what might happen if we lose our preeminence in the world, and if the rest of the 21st century is a Chinese century, not an American century. Just give you one example. I've played around a little bit with some of these Chinese AI models, DeepSeek. Obviously, have gotten a lot of attention. If you go to those AI chatbots and play around with them, it's kind of scary. They will tell you that the Tiananmen Square massacre never happened. They will tell you that Uyghurs in China are not being abused. They are not only trying to China's not only trying to control the future, they're trying to rewrite the past. I mean, this is like literally Orwellian Big Brother stuff. And you think about American technology. What if in the future Chinese companies are kind of leading the way rather than our companies? What does that mean for American workers? We're going to have to start taking our cues from Beijing. So yeah, I do worry about that.
Well, along that line, so staying on China a little bit more here, China theoretically is in an economic default on their real estate market. The people are invested heavily in their retirements. Is China stable with the power of what's happening over there? Are they able to maintain their grip, or do you think that they have some serious economic disruptions? Particularly, the Han are in control. But will they be able to keep that fluid, or do you think they're going to actually have to deal internally with those problems in a very negative way, including the demographic cliff that they are stepping over right now because of the one-child policy?
Yeah, I mean, I've read projections that their population is going to go from something like 1.4 billion now to something on the order of 300 to 400 million in the next 50 years. I mean, it is remarkable. Boy, I wish I could project the future like that. You like to think that history is kind of inevitable in some ways. It arcs towards freedom, and that the Chinese Communist Party will go the way of the Soviet, of the Soviet Communist Party. I that's the hope, but I will say the Chinese leadership is much more sophisticated and economically literate than the old Russians ever were. They're using technology and this kind of state monitoring in ways that the Russians back in the day could only have dreamed about doing in terms of control of the citizenry. So look, I believe in like I'm sure you do too, and the desire of every individual to for liberty and have a better life for themselves and their family. And you hope that over time that your average Chinese citizen will be empowered to speak for him or herself and stand up to the communists. But when that's going to happen, who knows? And it's certainly the case that the global leadership of the United States is going to be a big part of that if it ever does happen, that we're able to bring freedom to China.
And also in China, obviously we have the tariffs. We've announced that just this morning that we're going to have trade talks with China, which Wall Street's being very, very open-minded about, very positive. We saw also in the last 24 hours, Temu is stopping shipments of their product and are only going to ship out of American warehouses, meaning goods that they control here. does this actually hurt China, or does it hurt the United States in the short run? I don't think the long run's really that predictable, because I think things tend to cure themselves in the long run. But in the short run, how painful is it going to be for us, if at all?
Well, I think the president has acknowledged there's going to be some short term consequences for us, for consumers without access to some very cheap goods that, quite frankly, are only cheap are only so cheap because of what I would agree are kind of unfair trade practices and these tax loopholes which the president's closed. I think he was wise to do that. Look, over the long haul, I do think that trade and free trade with low barriers really is a good thing for our country and our economy. Just basic concepts like the comparative advantage. We need to trade with our friends, but the president's right. There has been a lot of unfairness and foreign subsidies and those massive fines that we're talking about on American companies. So I am hopeful that over the next few months you will start to see some of those trade deals. And the sense that I have, also living in a red state, is that people are going to be patient about this, but knock on wood, we get some quick wins.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna hop in.
All right,
here.
jump in.
We have about 2 minutes left of talk time, so at least for the radio portion, if you guys want to go further, you can. But I would say, Asheesh, let's get your final thoughts or what you would like to let the listeners know. If there's anything specific or important that you'd like to let them know. And then after that, if you guys want to reshoot the intro, you can do that, or we can just go put live on the radio.
All right, I'll cue this up then. And so what I want to do, Asheesh, for the final piece is ask for your top 3 to 5 walkaways. So effectively, we can get those. You can put a little narrative on it, and we'll wrap with that.
Yep.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, well, our time's ready. 3, 2, 1. Okay, our time is getting tight. Asheesh, if we had 3 to maybe 5 walkaway points that we need to be focused on, that you want our listeners to pay attention to, what would be those 3 things that they need to be focused on?
Yeah, we need a whole of society approach to winning the race for AI. That includes public-private partnerships on things like energy infrastructure and STEM education. Number 2, we need the United States to build alliances and work closely with our friends and allies abroad. That means ensuring that they're treating U.S. companies fairly and not imposing these multi-billion-dollar fines. And 3, we should do no harm at home. President Trump very wisely reversed one of President Biden's really onerous executive orders on AI that made investment and experimentation much more difficult. I will say I have been a little surprised to see some Trump appointees continuing some of former President Biden's initiatives, like on some of these technology lawsuits, where they're trying to break up some of our kind of biggest and most successful companies. I do think that's problematic, and I hope the president takes a look at that. But I think by working together, this is going to be another American century. We have the resources, the capacity, and the will to get the job done.
Good. That's what we like to hear. America leading the way is always positive. America as innovators, always positive. But we can't sit back and rest. The world is always moving, and it's good to have those insights. So thank you for spending time with us to give us that information. We'd love to get you back on up in the future as we watch these things develop, and if you could keep us apprised, that would be an honor to us to have that to move forward with. So the views and opinions expressed on the Shawn Parker Show are for informational purposes only and should not be taken as financial, legal, or investment advice. Shawn Parker, the Shawn Parker Show, Parker Realty Associates and their employees are not financial advisors, attorneys, or certified professionals, with an exception of licensed real estate professionals. Please consult with a qualified advisor or professional before making any financial, legal, or investment decisions.